We go to air tonight. An 11th hour fight is underway to keep the Iranian women's football team in Australia. With grave fears, the young women will face execution.
Ever notice how sometimes a moment in sports lasts only a few seconds, but the consequences can echo far beyond the stadium? A team lines up before a match, the anthem begins, cameras roll, and suddenly, the world is watching for reasons no one expected. What looked like a routine international tournament quietly turned into something far bigger. A silent gesture from a group of athletes sparked political outrage, global debate, and urgent questions about safety, loyalty, and courage. Some people saw protest, others saw defiance, and for the players involved, that single moment may have changed their lives forever. Now governments, sports organizations, and human rights groups are all paying attention, because sometimes the most powerful statement in sports isn't shouted, it's the one made in silence. 10. The Asian Cup protest. What triggered this entire situation was a moment that lasted only a few seconds on the field. During the Women's Asian Cup in Australia, several players from Iran's women's national football team stood quietly while their national anthem played before the match. For viewers around the world, it looked like a subtle and silent protest. In many countries, athletes have chosen similar gestures to express political opinions or solidarity with social movements. But in Iran, public acts of dissent, especially from national representatives, can be viewed very differently. Some reports even suggested that a few players may have used subtle hand gestures that observers interpreted as signals asking for help. Whether those claims were accurate or not, the moment quickly spread across social media and international news outlets. What seemed like a simple refusal to sing suddenly became a global discussion about politics, protest, and athlete safety. The players had barely left the field before the incident started raising serious questions about what might happen when they returned home. 9. The wartime traitor accusation. Soon after the match, the controversy intensified dramatically. An Iranian government spokesperson appeared on state television and described the players as wartime traitors. In many political systems, that might simply be strong language, but in Iran, that label carries extremely serious consequences. Historically, accusations of treason or acting against the state have led to severe punishments under Iranian law. In some cases, individuals facing such accusations have received long prison sentences, and in extreme situations, even the death penalty. The statement instantly alarmed human rights groups and international observers. Public accusations from high-ranking officials can sometimes influence how authorities and courts respond. Once a charge like that is broadcast nationwide, pressure can build for the government to take action. What had begun as a quiet protest during a sporting event now appeared to be evolving into something far more dangerous. For many watching around the world, the concern was no longer just about politics in sports. It was about the real-life safety of the players involved. 8. The case of Navid Afkari. One reason the world reacted so quickly is because the sports community remembers a chilling example from the recent past. Iranian wrestling champion Navid Afkari became the center of international attention after being arrested during anti-government protests in 2018. Authorities accused Afkari of killing a security guard during the demonstrations. However, he repeatedly insisted that his confession had been forced through torture while he was in custody. Prominent figures across the sports world spoke out, urging Iran to reconsider the sentence. Despite those appeals and the massive international pressure, Afkari was executed in 2020. That memory still influences how people view any situation involving Iranian athletes and political dissent today. 7. Another champion executed. The fears surrounding the current players are also influenced by another troubling case involving an Iranian athlete. In 2021, another national wrestling champion was executed, drawing condemnation from international human rights groups and sports advocates. Like previous cases, the athlete had achieved national recognition through sport, representing Iran in major competitions. Yet that status did not prevent his case from ending in a death sentence. For many observers, this raised serious questions about how protected athletes truly are. 6. A pattern going back. The relationship between Iranian athletes and political repression isn't just a recent phenomenon, it stretches back decades. One of the earliest examples often cited is the case of a former captain of Iran's national football team. In the early years after the Iranian Revolution, the football star was accused of political opposition to the ruling system. Despite his fame and status as a national hero, he was executed in 1984. For many people in the sports world, this case became a powerful symbol. It showed that even the most celebrated athletes could become targets if they were perceived as challenging the political system. Over the years, this story has been repeated in discussions about sports and human rights in Iran. It serves as a reminder that fame and international recognition have not always guaranteed safety. This historical context is one reason why recent events involving the women's soccer team are being watched so closely. 5. The case of Hossein Montazir al-Zohur. Another athlete whose story is frequently mentioned in these discussions is a national wrestling figure who was executed in the early 1980s during a period of intense political crackdowns following the Iranian Revolution. Although his name is less widely known internationally, historians and human rights advocates often cite his case when examining the treatment of athletes suspected of political dissent. At that time, the government was aggressively targeting individuals believed to oppose the new political order. Even athletes who had brought pride to the country through international competitions were not immune to those suspicions. For many observers, cases like these demonstrate that the intersection of politics and sports in Iran has long been complicated and sometimes dangerous. 4. Players reportedly seeking protection. As the controversy grew, reports began emerging that several members of the team were considering staying in Australia rather than returning home. According to sources close to the situation, some players had quietly expressed interest in seeking asylum. It was reported that at least a few players had left the team's hotel under the protection of local authorities. Their exact location was not publicly disclosed, likely for security reasons. The situation reportedly left many players conflicted. While some were determined to remain abroad, others were worried about family members back in Iran who might face pressure or retaliation. Whether confirmed or not, such reports only intensified the sense of urgency surrounding the situation. Suddenly, the conversation was no longer about a protest during a football match. It was about the difficult choices athletes face when their safety and their family's safety might both be at risk. 3. The 2026 crackdown. The concern surrounding the players doesn't exist in isolation. It's tied to the wider political climate inside Iran. In early 2026, the country experienced one of the most intense crackdowns on anti-government protests in recent years. Demonstrations had spread across multiple cities, with thousands of people taking to the streets to voice frustration over political restrictions and economic pressures. Iranian authorities later acknowledged that thousands of people were killed during the unrest. Reports from activists and international observers described a harsh response from security forces with arrests, violent clashes, and strict control over information. When governments face large-scale protests, they often become far more sensitive to acts that might encourage further dissent. Even symbolic gestures can be interpreted as political defiance. In that environment, something as visible as national team players refusing to sing the anthem during an international tournament can attract serious attention from authorities back home. 2. Women at the center of protest. Women have been at the heart of many protest movements in Iran over the past decade, often becoming powerful symbols of resistance and change. One of the most significant turning points came after the death of a young woman who died in custody following her arrest by the morality police. Her death triggered widespread demonstrations across the country and quickly captured global attention. What began as protests over strict dress code enforcement soon evolved into a much broader movement, demanding greater freedoms and rights for women. The slogan, "Women, Life, Freedom," became the rallying cry of the movement. Women in Iran and supporters around the world shared images of cutting their hair or removing headscarves in solidarity. Several young female protesters later became global symbols after losing their lives during demonstrations. Their stories spread across social media and international news outlets, increasing scrutiny of how women are treated in Iran. Because of this history, many observers now see the soccer players' silent protest as part of a larger struggle for women's rights. 1. International refugee law and possible asylum. If the players genuinely fear persecution after returning home, international law provides mechanisms designed to protect people in situations like this. The foundation of modern refugee protection comes from the United Nations Refugee Convention of 1951, which was created after World War II to protect individuals fleeing danger. One of its most important principles is called non-refoulement. This rule means a country cannot force someone to return to a place where they may face serious threats to their life or freedom. Because the Iranian team was competing in Australia, the players could potentially request protection from Australian authorities. If their claims were accepted, they might be allowed to stay under refugee or humanitarian protection. Other democratic nations could also step in. Countries like Canada or the United States sometimes offer special humanitarian pathways in urgent cases. For these athletes, what began as a quiet moment during a football match could ultimately lead to a decision that shapes their entire future. If this story caught your attention, make sure to like the video and share it with someone who follows global sports or politics. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.